WOR, AM and FM New York, originating your live Metropolitan Opera broadcasts, an RKO General station.
First intermission is time for Opera News on the air, the radio edition of the Metropolitan Opera Guild's magazine, Opera News. This afternoon we present the great Polish soprano, Madame Rosa Raisa, who will be interviewed by John Gutman, an assistant manager of the Metropolitan Opera. Mr. Gutman is also the director of the Metropolitan Opera Studio, which will start a 6-week tour on March 1st in schools and universities throughout the Midwest, performing scenes from Mozart's Così fan tutte. To many younger opera lovers today, Madame Raisa is chiefly a great name, but to those fortunate enough to have heard her recordings or any of her performances in some of the most demanding roles in opera, such as Donna Anna in Don Giovanni, or the title role of Bellini's Norma, she remains unforgettable for her opulent soprano voice and her sensitive portrayals. Will you take over now, please, Mr. Gutman?
Thank you, Mr. Cross, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our guest this afternoon is one of the great and illustrious artists of our time, Madame Rosa Raisa, who created the role of Turandot at its world premiere at La Scala, Milan, on April the 25th, 1926. She appeared in almost every major opera house in Europe and South America, and her great versatility is evidenced by the multitude of roles she has sung. Even a partial list of those roles includes Norma, the Marschallin in Rosenkavalier, Desdemona in Otello, Elisabeth in Tannhäuser, Donna Anna, Amelia in The Masked Ball, and Valentine in Les Huguenots. Her American debut, Madame Raisa, made as Aida at the Chicago Opera Company in 1913, where she became one of the most popular singers in the company. In addition to being the very first Turandot, I know, Madame Raisa, that you appeared in other world premieres and several American premieres. Won't you tell our audience, please, what some of those premieres were?
My pleasure, Mr. Gutman. In addition to Turandot, which is pronounced the way I pronounce it, and also it was pronounced by Puccini and Toscanini, so it's really Turandot, not Turandot.
Thank you very much, Madame Raisa. This interests me very much. I know that this has been a controversy for a long time, and, well, we certainly take your word for it since you were the original Turandot.
Thank you. I had the privilege of creating Nerone by Boito, Sor Angelica by Puccini, Isabeau by Mascagni, and also I sang the premiere of La Fiamma by Respighi, who taught me the role, the premiere of Concita by Zandonai, and his last opera, Partita at La Scala. Although I did not sing the first performance of Francesca da Rimini by Zandonai, I sang many of the initial performances. For example, at the Costanza Theater in Rome, at the Cologne Theater in Buenos Aires, at La Scala in Milan, and of course in Chicago.
A most impressive list, Madame Raisa. And that brings me to a question not many artists can answer, since they must have had just your kind of experience in order to answer it. Moreover, it would seem that there are fewer and fewer big important premieres in major opera houses today, so I cannot really let this opportunity go by without asking you. And it's this. What are the basic differences an artist faces learning a role in an opera that has never been performed before? There can't be the benefit of an established tradition, good or bad, one can learn from. Now, does that make it easier or more difficult?
I would say more difficult, naturally, because the artist has to establish a standard which he knows will become a precedent for future artists to use. But this concept is not unpleasant because the artist does not fear any comparison at that time.
Well, that's easy to understand. Before we go on to that famous Turandot premiere, please do tell us something of the beginning of your career. I know you were born in Poland, but you made your operatic debut in Italy. How did that happen?
Yes, I was born in Poland, but after my mother's death, I went to Capri with my cousins, Dr. and Mrs. Victor, and their 2 children. It was there that family friends, Mr. and Mrs. Corelli, heard me sing and offered me their help. Their aid made it possible to study singing at the Naples Conservatory under Barbara Marchisio. This was a dream come true, a dream I had had since I was a child of 6. After my graduation from the conservatory, Madame Marchisio took me to Milan for an audition with Maestro Campanini. I sang Casta Diva, Patria Mia, and E colori del campo from the Masked Ball and Vespri Siciliani.
All in one audition, Madame Raisa?
Yes.
These 4 incredible numbers, well, I must say, as somebody who is sitting in on many auditions on the other side of the fence, this is a list I've never yet had for an audition, and you were quite courageous, I must say.
Thank you. I shook hands with Maestro Campanini for a contract because I was too young to sign. I made my debut at Parma the 6th of September 1913 during the Verdi centenary in Verdi's first opera, Oberto Conte di San Bonifacio. Naturally, I want to mention Maestro Campanini's wife, Eva Tetrazzini, a great artist who helped me so much.
Here in America, Madame Raisa, your operatic home was with the Chicago Opera Company, and you toured the entire country very often, singing in New York, but never here at the Metropolitan Opera House. Why? Or is that maybe an indiscreet question?
Oh, no, not at all. After my debut, Maestro Campanini offered me a 3-year contract with the Chicago Opera Company and a tour with the company. This was like manna from heaven. Naturally, I accepted. My gratitude to Maestro Campanini was so great, and still is. In 1916, 2 offers came to me, one from Mr. Gatti Casazza of the Metropolitan Opera and one from Maestro Campanini, general manager of the Chicago Opera. Both very tempting. But of course, I accepted the contract offered by Maestro Campanini, my friend and my benefactor.
Aha, I see. And that is what prevented you from coming here to the Metropolitan Opera House and singing here.
Yes, I regret it very much.
So I'm sure everybody at the Metropolitan did, and indeed still does, Madame Raisa. Now, you mentioned the word general manager. So let's go back to Chicago and another fabulous general manager in that company who, besides, was a rather fabulous operatic personality. I'm, of course, speaking of your Chicago colleague, the extraordinary Mary Garden. She was a member of the company when you were, and she then became, of all things, its impresario for a time. Rumor has it that her 1921-22 season lost a cool $1 million. We know she was a great singing actress and a glamorous woman both on and off the stage. But please, would you tell us, what was Mary Garden like as an impresario?
I'll be delighted. I like to say what she said about me in her book. That is, Raisa is a charming woman. So, Mary Garden is a charming woman, I say. She certainly was a great artist in her repertoire. As for her ability as an impresario, I doubt if she lost so much as $1 million, but certainly she was generous in the fees she paid her colleagues. In all fairness, in the 2 seasons she managed, I don't think she could have avoided a financial disaster because of previous contracts not made by her, which she couldn't help cancel. Now, as for myself, I had a contract for 5 years. Maybe she would have gotten rid of me. Well, I wish she had done that.
Why'd you wish that, Madame Raisa?
Well, then I probably would have had an opportunity to sing in Metropolitan.
Well, that would have been very great, but then the novelty of our talk today wouldn't have been quite as exciting as it is having you here practically for the first time. Well, I wish we could go on reminiscing, Madame Raisa, but we must go on to the real subject of our visit, which, as we all well know, is Turandot. The world premiere of that great Puccini work, as everyone knows by now, took place after Puccini's death. It took place at the Scala in Milan in 1926, in the spring of 1926, and at that time Puccini had been dead for more than a year and a half. The conductor of the world premiere of Turandot was none other but Arturo Toscanini. But who was it who who chose you for the role of Turandot, Madame Raisa?
Well, I'm very happy and privileged to say that it was Puccini himself. It was the beginning of April 1924. I was on the stage of La Scala Theatre rehearsing the premiere, Boito's Nerone, Toscanini conducting, when Puccini came backstage to hear the rehearsal, during which he approached me and asked me to be his princess in his new opera, Turandot. Unfortunately, he died in the fall of 1924, leaving the opera unfinished after the death of Louis in the third act. It was a great satisfaction later to receive a cable from Maestro Toscanini confirming Puccini's wish, wanting me to be for rehearsals a month ahead of time, which was impossible for me because I was on tour with the Chicago Opera Company, and once my name was announced, dead or alive, I had to be there. So I cabled back to Maestro Toscanini the impossibility to be there early to rehearse, so he answered me, I shall wait for you.
Well, when did you finally get to Milano?
I got to Milan 3 weeks before the premiere.
3 weeks before the premiere, but surely that must have meant that other rehearsals were already good.
Of course. There was rehearsals already started a month ahead of time. When I arrived, it was the beginning of the ensemble rehearsals.
See. I understand. Here is a question which I know will interest everybody. We all have heard so many stories about the great Toscanini, how tough a taskmaster he was, how everybody trembled when he entered a rehearsal room. Davanti a lui tremava tutta Milano, or before him all of Milan trembled. In short, legend has it that Toscanini was quite an ogre. Well, you certainly must know, was he?
Well, of course, he was severe. He wanted perfection. Mediocrity did not exist. He respected the wishes of the composers religiously. It was a joy to rehearse with him. When you saw him enter the rehearsal room, his eyes were so kind and encouraging. You always wanted to do your best, and when you did so, he certainly was your best friend.
But if you did not do what he wanted you to do, then he wasn't such a good friend.
Yeah, God forbid. But we remained friends for the rest of his life.
May I ask you here, Madame Raisa, did you sing any other operas with Maestro Toscanini besides Turandot?
Oh, yes, I sang Trovatore and Falstaff with my husband at the Scala.
The rehearsals for Turandot were certainly something very outstanding, and nothing could be more fascinating for us than to hear some more, Madame Raisa, about what these rehearsals at the Scala in Milan were like.
Oh, the rehearsals were certainly long and frequent. Toscanini wanted the artist to sing each rehearsal as if it were a performance. Thereby, the artists gradually grew in detail into their roles. He was a magnet. He drew out whatever you possessed.
I heard it said quite often that he practically dominated everything in rehearsals, the stage as well as the orchestra.
He was everything: electrician, vocal coach, stage manager, producer, prompter, everything. Toscanini would sometimes keep us all till 2 o'clock in the morning, and yet he was the last one to leave. Rehearsal would start again at 10 in the morning. He practically lived in the theater, and you know what he used to eat on the stage? Dates and a cup of coffee. That was his only meal.
Tell us something about the musical part of the rehearsals. Can you give us some examples of some particular problems that arose?
Yes, well, I remember what he rehearsed most was the trio with the three
Ping, pang, pong.
Ping, pong, pong. And he was never satisfied. That continued every day. He would rehearse, first start with the trio, and then he would go to the rest.
Maestro Behr, would you play something for us? I don't know. It sounds very simple to me.
Well, it's not so simple. You see, the first part of the trio seemed to have rhythm problems. Then there was the question of balance of the voices and characterization changes in tempos, transitions, and of course it all had to have that Oriental feeling. You see, those three characters cannot just stand there. They're highly stylized commedia dell'arte characters and so important to the second act.
I think it is very generous of you, Madame Raisa, to speak of your three colleagues ping-pong-pong first, even though I know that one of them was your husband. But I do think we should now come to your own role and, tell us something about the problems you had there. You once told me that the great scene of the three riddles was one of the grave
Oh, yes,
problems.
that was very difficult. And Toscanini wanted me to mark every rhythm a crescendo of expression, of characterization.
In the riddles themselves.
Yes, in the
Maybe
daring him, every time she dared Collup. And at the third riddle, she was practically on top of him, telling him, at this point, Turandot is daring Collup to guess. And like a fury, she's after him. He at last guessed it, and of course the victory is Collup's.
the opening night of Puccini's Turandot was one of the great, fabulous events in recent music history. Do tell us what that famous night was like, Madame Raisa.
Well, I shall never forget it. It was a triumph from the beginning to the end. And for me, one of the most touching evenings of my long career. The audience consisted of some of the severest music critics in the whole world. And when I say that La Scala was packed, it was jammed.
That's easy enough to believe. The opera, as we said before, was not finished by Puccini because Puccini died before he could write the final duet and the final scene. And another composer, a pupil of Puccini's, Alfano, wrote these last two scenes. It has been told many times how Toscanini laid down his baton at the place where Puccini's music ended and Alfano's began. And then it seems he turned to the audience and told them that this was the last bar the maestro had written, and the curtain fell. I know the audience was surprised, but were the singers prepared for this?
No, not at all. We were only advised that the last duet would be cut that night. I shall never forget the scene I now tell you. After the death of Liu, Maestro Toscanini laid down his baton on the music stand and in a choked voice, without turning around, said these words, "E qui è morto il maestro." And here the maestro died. These words still ring in my ears. I can still feel the grief of everyone there.
It must have been a very emotional moment. And I have one more question that I always wanted to know. Did the curtain come down at the moment when Maestro Toscanini made that statement, or were you all on stage and he said it while the curtain was still open?
No, the curtain was up. I remember Turandot, myself, stand on the stairs of her castle, and the three masks were in one corner. Collup, the tenor, was standing in front of me, and while Timur, holding Liu's death while she was carried away off stage, repeating the orchestra those beautiful phrases of Liu's aria, they walked off. And when the stage was freed, Toscanini came and said these words.
Mm-hmm. And this was completely unrehearsed. I take it that in the dress rehearsal you did sing the full opera, including the Alfano ending.
Yes, in the dress rehearsal we sang with a duet, except for the evening of the opening. We sang only to Liu's death.
In the opening night, the maestro said these famous words, and then after that the curtain came down. Now, Madame Raisa, Do you remember how many performances you sang of Turandot in that first season at the Scala? And also, did you sing Turandot elsewhere, or did you sing it in other seasons at La Scala?
Oh, yes, I remember distinctly. We sang 7 performances in 3 weeks. I created the same opera in Chicago and sang it also at Cologne in Buenos Aires.
It is really too sad, Madame Raisa, that you never had an occasion to sing that great role here at the Metropolitan. And by the way, have you seen the Metropolitan's current performance of Turandot?
Yes, I have. And if I may, I want to tell you, it brought tears to my eyes, to reminisce, to go back to the memories. The Metropolitan's production is stupendous. Mr. Bing and all of you should be very proud of it.
Thank you very much. Our audience is naturally always interested in knowing what the great stars do after they retire from the theater. I know that you have made America your home, and recently you moved from Chicago to California. What keeps you busy these days, or are you enjoying a well-deserved carefree life after all those long and rich years of your career?
My life with my family in California is a busy one. I live with my daughter Juliet and my son-in-law Charles, Dr. Segala, and my 2 adorable grandchildren, Susie and Georgie. They are so darling. I have so much fun with them. Think they also teach me how to twist.
Really? Yes.
And of course, I am active in the musical world, helping young talents to develop, giving them my advice, my knowledge, and my experience. And occasionally, to a promising student, my help and my encouragement. And now, thank you, Mr. Gutman, for the opportunity to share with you and all my friends in the radio audience these treasured memories from my career.
Thank you, Miss Raisa and Mr. Gutman.